"Get out from behind that counter," Travis Dalton said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolute. "Or I will make sure you never work in this city again." Madison Harper did not move. She was 24 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and standing alone inside a motorcycle repair shop on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 men between her and the door. Her hands were flat on the glass counter. Her jaw was set. And the only thing she said back to Travis Dalton, the man with the expensive watch and the dead eyes and 2 large men behind him who had locked the front door the moment they walked in, was this: "Then I guess you better get started." Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The shop was called Cole's Custom Cycle Works, and it sat on the corner of a quiet block in Phoenix, Arizona, the kind of street where the heat came off the asphalt in waves and the afternoons stretched long and heavy in a way that made time feel like it was moving through syrup. It was not a famous shop. It was not large. There were 3 repair bays, a small waiting area with mismatched chairs, a parts counter, and a glass display case that held helmets, gloves, and a few accessories that Ethan Cole had ordered in a fit of optimism 2 years ago and had never fully managed to sell. Ethan Cole was 61 years old. He had thick hands, a gray beard, and a way of moving through the world that suggested he had once been a very different kind of man and had made a deliberate decision to become someone quieter. He did not talk about his past. He did not display anything on the walls that hinted at what his life had looked like before he opened the shop. What he did instead was show up every morning at 6:30, make a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and work on motorcycles until his back hurt and the day was done. He had hired Madison Harper 8 months ago. She had walked in off the street with a handwritten resume and a look in her eyes that said she was not asking for charity. She was applying for a job, and if he did not give it to her, she would walk out that door and find someone who would. Ethan had hired her on the spot, not because he needed the help, though he did, but because he recognized something in the way she held herself. Something that said she had been knocked down and had gotten up so many times that getting up had stopped feeling optional and started feeling like the only available response to anything the world threw at her. He never asked her much about her life. She volunteered pieces of it over time, the way people do when they begin to trust someone. Her mother had died 14 months before she walked into Cole's. Breast cancer, quick and merciless. Madison had spent the last 8 months of her mother's life working double shifts at a chain restaurant to cover the medical bills. And when her mother passed, she had found herself in a city that felt unfamiliar, with no family nearby, and a grief that she carried like a stone she had learned to walk around instead of put down. She had told Ethan all of this one afternoon while they were doing inventory, speaking with the same matter-of-fact tone she used to describe everything else, and Ethan had listened without interrupting. And when she was done, he had said, simply, "Well, you're here now," and somehow that had been enough. By the time Travis Dalton walked through the front door of Cole's Custom Cycle Works on that Tuesday in August, Madison had been working there long enough to know every regular customer by name, every tool in the shop by location, and every invoice in the filing cabinet by number. She knew how Ethan liked his paperwork organized and how he liked his mornings quiet. Coffee first, conversation second. She knew which of the regulars needed a reminder to pick up their bikes and which ones would come in just to talk and would need gentle redirecting back to the parking lot when the afternoon got busy. She knew the shop the way you know a place that has become part of your routine, part of the structure that holds your days together when other parts of your life are still in the process of being rebuilt. What she did not know, not yet, was that Ethan had stepped out at noon to run parts to a customer across town, and that he had texted her saying he would be back by 3, and that it was currently 2:15, and that the 3 men who had just walked through the front door and locked it behind them were not there to buy helmets. Travis Dalton was 47 years old. He wore clothes that were expensive, without being flashy, the kind of expensive that announced itself quietly. In the quality of the fabric and the precision of the fit. He had the look of a man who had spent his adult life in rooms where other people did whatever he said, and who had come to find it natural, unremarkable. The way some people find it natural and unremarkable to breathe. He had a real estate development company, 3 shell corporations, and a particular business model that involved identifying small property owners who were either financially vulnerable or legally unsophisticated, and finding ways to make them sign things they did not fully understand until it was too late to undo. Cole's Custom Cycle Works sat on a corner lot that Travis Dalton wanted. He had been wanting it for 14 months. He had made Ethan Cole 3 offers, each one worded carefully enough to sound reasonable, while being structured to leave Ethan significantly worse off than he appeared. Ethan had declined all 3. Not rudely, not with long speeches. He had read each offer, set it down on the counter, and said some version of the same thing each time. I appreciate you coming in, but this isn't something I'm going to do. And Travis had smiled and said, of course, no pressure, and had gone back to his office and begun working on other approaches. The third approach was the one he was implementing today. He had done his research. He knew that Ethan Cole had a business loan with a regional bank that had a balloon payment coming due in 4 months. He knew that the shop's revenue had been uneven, that there was a period 2 years ago when Ethan had missed 2 consecutive quarterly filings with the county, which had created a paper trail problem that a skilled attorney could potentially use as a lever to question the legitimacy of certain business licenses. He knew that Ethan drove to the opposite side of the city every Tuesday afternoon to deliver parts to an elderly customer who couldn't get around easily, and that this errand typically took between 2 and 3 hours. He had timed this visit accordingly. The 2 men behind Travis were named Carl and Derek. Carl was large in the way that suggested he had once been an athlete and had stopped being one some time ago, without significantly adjusting his diet. Derek was quieter, leaner, and had eyes that moved around the room in a way that suggested he was cataloging exits. They were not introduced, and they did not introduce themselves. Travis walked to the counter. Madison looked at him. We're here to see Ethan Cole, Travis said. Mr. Cole isn't in, Madison said. Can I help you with something? When will he be back? Later this afternoon. If you want to leave a message, I can make sure he gets it. Travis smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to go and was simply performing the opening courtesies before getting to the part that mattered. Actually, he said, I think I'd rather wait. Do you mind? Before Madison could answer, Derek had moved to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The sound of it was small, mechanical, and very loud in the quiet of the shop. Madison's eyes went to the door and came back to Travis. That lock stays open during business hours, she said. It's fine, Travis said. We won't be long. He looked around the shop with the expression of someone appraising real estate, which was exactly what he was doing. Nice place. How long have you worked here? Long enough. What's this about? Travis put both hands on the counter, leaning forward with the practiced ease of a man who used his physical presence as a tool and had been doing it long enough that it had become automatic. I have some documents I need to retrieve from Mr. Cole's filing system, business records related to a transaction that affects my company. I'm going to need access to his back office. Madison did not move. Mr. Cole's filing system is private business property, she said. I'm not authorized to give anyone access to it without his direct permission. If you have a legal claim to documents, you'll need to contact him directly or go through proper channels. Travis looked at her for a moment. Then he tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they are recalibrating their approach. I understand that, he said. But I think if you understood the full situation, you'd see that this is actually in Mr. Cole's best interest. We have some concerns about certain filing irregularities that have come to our attention. The kind of irregularities that, if they were to become known to the county licensing board, could cause significant problems for the continued operation of this business. He paused. I'm trying to help him get ahead of that. Then you can call him, Madison said. Or you can leave your name and number and I'll make sure he calls you. I'd really prefer to handle this now. I'm sure you would, Travis studied her. You're very confident for someone who's just a clerk. Madison looked at him steadily. She felt the fear she would be dishonest with herself later if she pretended she hadn't. 3 men, a locked door, and a threat wrapped up in legal language. The fear was real and it was present. But underneath it was something else, something that had been built over 14 months of grief and survival, and learning that the alternative to doing the hard thing was letting the hard thing be done to you. I'm confident because I know my job, she said. And my job right now is to tell you that you're not getting into those files. Travis straightened. Something shifted in his expression, not anger, not yet, but the preliminary movement toward it. The moment when a man who is used to compliance processes the information that he is not going to get it. He looked back at Carl and Derek and then back at Madison. Here's what's going to happen, he said, and his voice had changed, stripped now of the performance of reasonableness. Carl is going to go around that counter, and you are going to step aside, and we are going to find what we came here for. And when Ethan Cole comes back, you are going to tell him that this was a courtesy, that I could have done this differently. Madison's right hand moved. It was a small movement, casual, the kind of thing that might have looked like she was simply shifting her position. But her fingers found the edge of her phone, where it sat behind the counter, and in a motion she had practiced not for this, not for anything like this, simply out of the habit of someone who had grown up being careful. She pressed the screen recording function and then laid the phone screen down on the shelf below the counter, propped at an angle she had already calculated would catch audio clearly. Carl, Travis said, and nodded toward the counter. Carl came around. Madison did not run. She did not scream. She took one step sideways, keeping the counter between herself and Carl, and she looked directly at Travis and said, I want you to explain to me exactly what documents you're looking for and what legal authority you believe you have to access them. Carl stopped. He had not expected her to talk. Travis blinked. He had not expected it either. And that was the first miscalculation. Because Travis Dalton was very good at frightening people into silence, he was less experienced with people who, when frightened, started asking careful questions. I don't owe you an explanation, he said. No, Madison agreed. But if this is legitimate, you should be able to give one. So humor me. What documents are you looking for? Travis's jaw tightened. Business records related to the 2019 loan agreement between Cole's Custom Cycle Works and First Regional Bank. Specifically, the amendment documents signed in March of 2021. Madison nodded slowly. She knew the filing system well enough to know exactly which drawer those documents would be in. She also knew that those documents had nothing in them that would be useful to Travis Dalton unless he intended to alter them. And you believe you have the right to access those without Mr. Cole's permission because my company is a co-signatory on certain financial instruments related to that loan. That's not true, Madison said. Travis's expression shifted. Excuse me? I filed every document in this office. I know that loan agreement. Your company's name is not on it. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Travis said with very controlled quiet, you're going to want to be very careful about the next thing you say. I'm being careful, Madison said. I'm asking you to explain the legal basis for what you're doing. And if you can't explain it, then what you're doing is breaking and entering, and I think you know that. Carl looked at Travis. Derek, near the door, had gone very still. Travis put both hands flat on the counter again. Here's what I know, he said. I know that this shop has a balloon payment due in 4 months, that Ethan Cole does not have the liquid assets to cover. I know that his licensing filings 2021 have discrepancies that could use to challenge his current license. And I know that if I wanted to, I could make the next 4 months of his life very expensive and very complicated. He leaned in. I'm not doing that. Instead, I'm here having a conversation because I'm a reasonable man. And I'd like the woman behind this counter to understand that being reasonable back would be significantly better for everyone in her orbit. Madison looked at him. Her heart was hammering. She was aware of Carl 2 feet to her left. She was aware of Derek at the door. She was aware that she was alone in a locked building with 3 men who had just told her, in so many words, that they intended to use financial ruin as leverage, and that the person they were targeting was a 61-year-old man who had given her a job when she had nothing else. She thought about her mother. She thought, specifically, about a conversation they had had in a hospital room 11 months before she died, when her mother had taken her hand and said, "You have always been braver than you know. The world is going to need that from you at some point. Don't be afraid to let it." She had not understood what her mother meant at the time. She had thought it was the kind of thing people said when they were trying to give you something to carry forward. She understood it now. "Let me ask you something," Madison said. Travis raised an eyebrow. "How many other shop owners have you done this to?" The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had a different texture. Travis's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did, some small recalibration of his assessment of who he was dealing with. "That's an interesting question," he said finally. "I'm an interesting person," Madison said. "How many this conversation is over," Travis said. He nodded at Carl. "Get behind that counter and get me those files." Carl moved toward her. Madison stepped back, keeping distance, and said clearly and loudly, "I want you to know that I have not given permission for anyone to access the filing system in this office. I want that to be very clear. And I want you to know that anything that happens from this point forward is happening against my explicit objection." Carl stopped again. He was not a careful man, but he was a cautious one. And something about the way she was speaking measured, deliberate, like someone making a record, made him uncertain. "Carl," Travis said, and his voice had an edge in it now. "She's—" Carl started. "Go around her." Carl went around her. He pulled open the door to the back office and disappeared inside. Travis watched Madison. Madison watched Travis. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm terrified," she said. "But I'm not going to show you that." Travis almost smiled. "Almost." "That's actually impressive," he said. And he sounded like he meant it, which somehow made it worse. "But it doesn't change anything. When Ethan gets back, he's going to realize that his best option is the one I've been offering him for the past year. And you're going to realize that you made today harder than it needed to be." "I want to ask you something else," Madison said. Travis tilted his head. "The shop owners, the other ones. Did any of them fight back?" "No," Travis said. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I want you to understand the pattern," he said. "I want you to understand that this isn't personal. This is business. And in business, the pattern is always the same. The small ones don't fight because they know they can't win. What happens if they try?" Travis looked at her for a long moment. "Then it gets expensive. For them." From the back office, the sound of drawers opening. Madison kept her breathing steady. She was thinking. She was thinking about the phone on the shelf below the counter, about the audio it was collecting, about every word Travis Dalton had said in the last 12 minutes. She was thinking about what was being collected and what it added up to. Extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful entry, the implied threat of economic harm used as coercion. She was not a lawyer, but she was intelligent and she had been paying attention, and she knew that what had been said in this room, recorded clearly and without ambiguity, was the kind of thing that did not stay small when it was brought into the light. She was also thinking about a name. It was a name she had come across only once, in a context she had not fully understood at the time, a name written in the inside cover of an old notebook she had found while reorganizing the back office 6 weeks ago, next to a phone number and 2 words written beneath it in Ethan's handwriting, "Still here." She had asked Ethan about it casually, and Ethan had paused for a moment before saying, "That's someone I knew a long time ago. Someone I could call if I ever needed to." And then he had not said anything else. And Madison had not pushed, because she knew how to read the silences of people who carried histories they had chosen to set down. She had not forgotten the name. or the number. Carl came back out of the back office with a folder of documents and set them on the counter. Travis looked through them. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, the specific kind of shift that happens when someone finds what they came for. He closed the folder, picked it up. "This is theft," Madison said. "This is asset recovery," Travis said. "You wouldn't understand the distinction." "I understand it fine," she said. "I'm just naming what it is." Travis looked at her one last time. "Tell Ethan Cole that my offer still stands." "He has 30 days, he nodded at Derek. Derek unlocked the front door. The three men walked out. The door closed behind them. Madison stood behind the counter for approximately 4 seconds. Then she reached below the counter, picked up her phone, and stopped the recording. She looked at the screen. 41 minutes of audio. Clear, unambiguous, and complete. She took one breath, then another. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled until she found the number she had quietly transferred into her phone 6 weeks ago on an afternoon when something she could not name had made her feel it was the kind of number worth keeping. She stared at it for a moment. "Marcus Bennett." She pressed call. It rang twice. A man answered. His voice was unhurried. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who had learned a long time ago that urgency and panic were different things and that only one of them was useful. "Who is this?" he said. "My name is Madison Harper," she said. "I work at Cole's Custom Cycle Works. Ethan Cole is my employer. 3 men just broke in to this shop and took documents and threatened the owner. I have it all recorded." She paused. "I found your name in Ethan's things. He wrote 'still here' next to it. I'm hoping that means something." There was a pause on the other end. Then Marcus Bennett said, "What's the address?" Madison told him. "Don't touch anything," he said. "Don't let anyone else in. And stay on the line." "Okay," she said. "You did the right thing calling," he said. And then, with a quiet certainty that settled over her, like the first cold thing she had felt in hours, "You're not alone anymore." She stood in the empty shop, phone pressed to her ear, and for the first time since Travis Dalton had walked through that door, she felt the fear shift, not disappear, not collapse, but shift, make room for something else, something that felt like the first breath after a very long time underwater. Outside, the afternoon sun was hammering the asphalt of a quiet Phoenix street, and somewhere across the city, an engine turned over. Then another, and another, and the sound of them, small at first, was already on its way. Marcus Bennett had not asked her to repeat herself. That was the first thing Madison noticed. Most people, when you called them out of nowhere with a story about 3 men breaking into a motorcycle shop and stealing documents and threatening the owner, said things like, "Wait, slow down, or I'm sorry, who are you again?" Marcus had listened to approximately 45 seconds of what she told him, and then he had asked for the address, told her not to touch anything, and told her to stay on the line. No hesitation, no clarification. Just the calm, immediate movement of a man whose instincts were still wired for exactly this kind of moment, even after years of living quietly. She kept the phone to her ear. She did not sit down. Something in her body was still running on the adrenaline of the last hour. And sitting felt wrong, felt like stopping. And stopping felt dangerous. Even though the shop was empty now and the door was unlocked, and Travis Dalton's car had pulled away from the curb 12 minutes ago. "You still there?" Marcus said. "I'm here." "Good. Tell me what he took." Specifically, Madison thought back. A folder from the 3rd drawer of the left cabinet. Ethan labels everything. That drawer is his loan documentation, the original agreement with First Regional Bank, the quarterly payment records, some correspondence with the bank from 2021. "The 2021 correspondence," Marcus said. "What was that about?" "There was a period where the shop had 2 missed quarterly filings with the county. Not the bank, the county business licensing office. It created a paperwork issue. Ethan got it resolved, but the letters are in there documenting the back and forth." A pause. "And Dalton knows about those letters. He mentioned the filing irregularities directly. He said they could be used to challenge the shop's current license." "He's not wrong about that," Marcus said. And his voice had the tone of a man thinking out loud, working through something. which means he's planning to use those documents as leverage, either to force Ethan to sign something or to create enough legal interference that the balloon payment comes impossible to manage. He paused again. How long until Ethan gets back? Madison checked the time. 30, maybe 40 minutes. Okay, don't call him yet. Why not? Because if you call him while he's driving, he's going to panic, and a panicking 61-year-old man driving across Phoenix in August heat is a problem we don't need on top of everything else. A beat. You said you recorded the whole thing. 41 minutes. Everything he said about the other shop owners, the threats, the documents, all of it. For the first time, there was something in Marcus's voice that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. How'd you know to do that? Madison thought about it. I didn't know, she said. I knew that whatever was happening, the only thing I had to fight with was the truth. And the truth only matters if you can prove it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Ethan never told me much about you. He doesn't talk much. No, Marcus agreed. He doesn't. But he called me 6 months ago when he hired you. First time he'd called me in 4 years. He said he'd found someone good. Another pause, shorter this time. He was right. Madison did not know what to do with that. She held it carefully and set it aside for later. What happens now, she said. Now, Marcus said, you let me make some calls. The line did not go dead. He put her on hold, or something like hold. A silence that was not disconnected, but was simply the other side of a phone pressed against a chest, while a man in another part of Phoenix spoke to other people in low, direct sentences. Madison stood behind the counter and waited. She looked at the back office door, still hanging open from when Carl had gone through it. She looked at the empty space on the counter where the folder had been. She looked at the front door, unlocked now, afternoon light pressing against the glass. She thought about Travis Dalton's face in the moment when she had asked him how many other shop owners he had done this to. The way he had answered, no, not defensive, not evasive, just flat, factual, the answer of a man who had done it enough times that it had stopped requiring any emotional energy at all. That was what stayed with her, not the threat, not the physical presence of Carl moving through the office. It was the flatness, the complete absence of any register that suggested he understood he was doing something wrong. He had the certainty of someone who had operated without consequence for long enough that consequence had started to feel theoretical. She intended to make it feel very real. Marcus came back on the line. I've made 3 calls, he said. There are people who are going to want to hear that recording. Not just here, I mean, people who have been trying to build a case on Dalton for a while. He's been doing this across 4 counties, Madison. The shop owners he's been targeting, most of them, are immigrants, older people, people who don't trust the system enough to go to it for help. He's been relying on that, relying on them staying quiet. How long has this been going on? Best I can tell, 3 years, maybe more. He let that sit for a moment. You got 41 minutes of him talking. If that recording is as clean as you're saying it is, you just handed someone the kind of evidence that doesn't come along often. Madison thought about this. Will it be enough? Depends on who hears it and how fast it moves, Marcus said. But yeah, it's enough to start something. He paused. I'm also making some calls of a different kind. What does that mean? It means Ethan has people, Marcus said. People who go back a long way and who have been watching from a distance but haven't looked away. And when one of those people has a problem, the others want to know. Madison processed this. The Hells Angels, she said. Marcus did not answer right away. Ethan told you about that? He didn't have to, she said. The notebook. The way you answered the phone. The way you're talking right now. I'm not slow. Another one of those almost smiles from the other end of the line. No, Marcus said. You're definitely not that. The front door opened. Madison's hand tightened on the phone. But it was only Ray Kowalski, one of the shop's regulars, a retired postal worker in his late 60s who came in twice a week to talk to Ethan about the carburetor rebuild they'd been doing on his 1978 shovelhead. Ray came in the way he always did, with a takeout coffee from the place down the street and a slight limp from an old knee injury. and he stopped when he saw Madison's face. "You okay?" he said. "Working on it," she said. Ray set his coffee on the counter and looked at the open back office door and looked back at her with the experienced eyes of a man who had spent 30 years delivering a mail in neighborhoods where he'd learned to read a situation from the outside before walking into it. "Something happened," he said. It was not a question. "Some men came in," Madison said. "They took some of Ethan's documents. I have it recorded." Ray put both hands flat on the counter, the same surface Travis had put his hands on. But the gesture was entirely different, the gesture of someone steadying himself before deciding what to do. "You need me to stay," he said. "I need you to not call Ethan yet," she said. "Can you do that?" "Yeah," Ray said. "I can do that." He pulled out one of the mismatched waiting room chairs and sat down without being asked. "I'll be right here." Madison nodded. She brought the phone back to her ear. "Marcus, still there, still here," he said. Who came in? Regular customer." "He's fine. He's going to stay." "Good." A pause. "Ethan's going to be back soon. When he gets there, let me talk to him first. Don't hand him the phone. Just tell him Marcus wants to talk. Okay?" "Okay," Madison said. And then, because she needed to ask it, "Are you coming here?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "We're coming." She noticed the plural. She did not ask about it. Ethan Cole's truck pulled into the parking lot at 3:12 in the afternoon. Madison watched through the front window as he got out, moved around to the bed of the truck to grab an empty parts bin, set it down, and then went still. She could not see his face clearly from where she was standing, but she could see the way his body changed, the way the relaxed slump of a man returning from a routine errand went rigid in a way that had nothing to do with his back and everything to do with instinct. He was reading the lot, reading the street. Some part of him, some layer of him that had never entirely left the life he used to live, had caught something in the air. He came inside. His eyes went to Madison first, then to Ray, sitting in the waiting area, then to the open door of the back office. "Madison," he said, and his voice was very controlled. "Tell me," she told him. She told him all of it, cleanly and without editorial. The way she had learned to communicate the important things, with precision, without drama, because the facts themselves were dramatic enough and adding emotion to them only obscured what needed to be clearly understood. She told him about Travis, about Carl and Derek, about the locked door and the documents and the 41 minutes of audio. She told him what Travis had said about the other shop owners. She told him about the phone call. Ethan listened without interrupting. His face went through several things during the telling. None of small, all of them carefully managed. When she was done, he said, "You called Marcus." "I found his number in your notebook," she said. "6 weeks ago. I'm sorry for going through your things." Ethan shook his head. "Don't apologize for that." He looked at the phone in her hand. "He wants to talk to me?" "He said to tell you Marcus wants to talk first." Ethan took the phone. He walked to the far end of the counter, not for privacy, but simply out of habit, the habit of a man who had always thought better with space. Madison watched him listen, watched the line of his shoulders, watched the way he pressed one hand flat against the counter, that same steadying gesture, and left it there. He said almost nothing. A few short responses. "Yeah, I know. How many?" And then a longer silence, and then, "I didn't want it to go this way." And then, after another pause, "Okay." And finally, quietly, with something in his voice that Madison could not fully name but recognized as the sound of a man making peace with a door he thought he had closed for good. "Okay, Marcus, tell them." He handed the phone back to Madison. She put it to her ear. "Marcus?" He said, "Yes," Marcus said. "Yes to what?" "To letting us come," Marcus said. "All of us." She did not ask how many all of us was. She understood from the way he said it that all of us was not 2 or 3, was not a small group that would slip in quietly and handle things with the kind of discretion that left no visible impression. She understood from his tone that all of us was the kind of number that changed the character of a street. She found out how many when Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, not paternally, not protectively, but with the weight of someone who wanted her to understand that what was about to happen mattered, and said, "You should probably call whoever you trust most right now. If you want someone here with you." Because it's going to get loud. Madison looked at him. How loud? Ethan almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a full smile she had ever seen from him. The kind of loud, he said, that makes people stop their cars. Ray Kowalski, from across the room, said quietly, oh, he had understood before she had. He had heard the word Marcus and made the connection that she was still completing. And the syllable he produced, quiet, waited, carrying inside it the specific awe of a man who had spent decades in a neighborhood where you learned what certain sounds meant and what they meant when they arrived in force, said everything that needed to be said. Madison called no one. She had no one to call, not in the way Ethan meant. Her mother was gone. She had friends, scattered, the kind of friendships that had survived distance and grief, but were not the kind you called when three men broke into a shop and the floor was about to fall out from under someone's life. What she did instead was stand behind that counter, the same counter she had stood behind for 8 months, the counter where she had learned the shop and the regulars and the rhythms of a business built by a quiet man with a complicated past, and she waited. Ethan went into the back office. She heard him on the phone. Not Marcus, this time other calls, short and purposeful. She heard him say Dalton's name twice. She heard him say Tuesday and First Regional and 30 days. She heard him pause at one point for a long time, the silence of a man hearing something he was processing carefully. And then he said, in a tone she had not heard from him before, something low and certain that she couldn't quite make out, but that landed in the room with the finality of a door being shut. Ray Kowalski was still sitting in the waiting area. He had not left. He had not touched his coffee. He was simply present, the way people of a certain age and experience are present when the situation calls for witness rather than action, not passive. Not disengaged, but attending in the full sense of that word. You knew Ethan before the shop? Madison asked him. I knew of him, Ray said. Didn't know him until about 4 years ago. He came to my street once, long time back. Had a situation with a neighbor of mine, man, was being squeezed out of his house by a predatory lender. Nothing illegal enough to make the police move fast, but wrong enough to be wrong. He picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it down. About 30 riders showed up one morning. Just parked. Just sat there. Didn't do a thing except exist. The lender's representative came to the door, saw 30 motorcycles on the street, and left without knocking. He paused. Neighbor kept his house. Madison absorbed this. Ethan organized that, she said. Ethan was one of them, Ray said. He was the one who made the call. He looked at the back office door. Man retired from that life, but some things you can't retire from. The part of you that knows what's right, that doesn't have a pension plan. She thought about that for a long time. 20 minutes later, Ethan came out of the back office. He looked at Madison. He looked at the recording on her phone. Can I hear some of it? He said. She played him 3 minutes. The section where Travis explained the filing irregularities. The section where he confirmed that other shop owners had been approached and had not fought back. The section where he told Carl to go around the counter and get the files. Ethan listened with his arms crossed and his jaw set. When the audio ended, he said nothing for a moment. Then he said he was right about the balloon payment. I don't have the liquid assets to cover it in 4 months. Okay, Madison said. I want you to understand what he was actually threatening, Ethan said, dumb. It's not just my business. 3 other guys rent space in the building next door that I own. Ray's buddy Luis has his machine shop in there. There's a guy named Davis who does upholstery. There's a woman named June who runs an alterations business that supports, I think it's 4 employees now. He stopped. If Travis gets his property, all of them go. Madison looked at him. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Ethan looked back at her with the expression of a man who had spent so long carrying things alone that the idea of distributing the weight had genuinely not occurred to him as an option. Because it was my problem, he said. Not anymore, Madison said. Something moved through his face. Something that was not quite emotion, and not quite not emotion. The specific interior shift of a person encountering a loyalty they had not asked for, and had not expected, and did not entirely know how to receive. No, he said quietly. I guess it's not. The first sound came at 4:47 in the afternoon. It was distant. It was low. It was the kind of sound that did not immediately announce itself as anything specific, just a vibration in the air. A frequency change, the way you feel, a coming thunderstorm in your back teeth before the sky has committed to anything. Ray Kowalski stood up from his chair. Ethan walked to the front door and opened it. The sound was growing. Not chaotically, not in the scrambled way of random noise becoming louder, but in the organized, deepening way of something large, moving with direction and purpose. It had a rhythm to it that was almost musical, not a single engine, but dozens. And then what seemed like more than dozens, layered and building on each other in a way that vibrated in the chest before it became distinct to the ears. Madison came to stand beside Ethan in the doorway. She looked down the street. The first riders came into view at the far end of the block. And behind them, more and behind those, more still. Coming from both ends of the street simultaneously, the way you'd block a route if you wanted to make certain there was nowhere a person could go that wasn't towards you. They moved with the precision of people who had done this before, who understood that presence itself was communication, that the message was not in any individual action, but in the collective fact of arrival. Ray Kowalski, standing behind them, said very quietly, "Lord have mercy." Ethan said nothing, but Madison felt him exhale beside her a long, slow breath, the kind a person releases when something they have been holding for a very long time is finally allowed to set itself down. She had not known how many Marcus had meant when he said all of us. She knew now. They filled the street in both directions, as far as she could see, engines dropping to idle one by one, the sound shifting from a roar to a low, steady, collective pulse that seemed to settle into the ground itself. The riders who arrived first did not dismount. They simply stopped and waited. And one by one the others arrived and stopped and waited too, until the street held them all and the air held the sound of their engines like a crowd holding its breath. At the very front of the group, a motorcycle pulled to the curb directly in front of the shop. The man who got off it was older, late 60s, broad through the shoulders, with hands that told the story of decades of physical work. He moved without rushing. He wore no expression that performed anything. He took off his helmet and hung it from the handlebar and looked at the doorway where Ethan Cole and Madison Harper were standing side by side. Marcus Bennett and Ethan Cole looked at each other across the short distance between the curb and the door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Marcus said, "You look old, Ethan." And Ethan said, "You look the same, liar," Marcus said. And then the almost smile became an actual one. Brief and real, the smile of two men who had a long history that included things neither of them talked about, and a trust that had survived the years between those things in this moment. He looked at Madison. "You're the one who called," he said. "I'm the one who called," she said. Marcus looked at her for a moment. The way he looked at her was not the way Travis Dalton had looked at her, not an assessment of vulnerability, not a calculation of what she could be used for. It was the look of someone taking the actual measure of a person, reading not surface, but weight. "Ethan said you were good," he said. "That's high praise from him." "I know," Madison said. Marcus nodded slowly. He looked back at the street, at the riders, at the engines still running, at the quiet, massive fact of what had assembled here on a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, because a man named Ethan Cole had once been the kind of person who showed up for people, and those people had not forgotten. "So," he said, "tell me everything from the beginning," Madison told him. She told him clearly, completely, without hurry. She told him about Travis Dalton and the 30-day threat, and the other shop owners and the documents and the 41 minutes of audio. She told him about First Regional Bank and the balloon payment and the county filing irregularities that Travis intended to weaponize. She told him about Luis's machine shop and Davis's upholstery and June's alterations business and the 4 employees whose livelihoods were threaded into the same piece of ground that Travis Dalton had decided he needed to own. Marcus listened, the way he had listened on the phone, with the full, quiet attention of a man who understood that the time to ask questions was after you had the whole picture, not before. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The recording." She held up her phone. "Send it to this number," he said, and gave her a number. "That's a man named Gerald Hooper. He's a federal investigator. He's been trying to build a case on Dalton for 14 months. He's been waiting for someone who was willing to go on record." Madison looked at her phone. She looked at the street full of riders. She looked at Ethan, who was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who had arrived at a decision he was going to stand behind. "If I send this," she said, "it starts something." "Yes," Marcus said. "Something I can't take back." "Yes," Marcus said again. And then, with the same quiet certainty he had used on the phone, "Do you want to take it back?" Madison thought about Travis's voice, telling her that the small ones don't fight. She thought about her mother's hands. She thought about June's alterations shop and Luis's machine shop and an old man named Ethan Cole who had given a grieving young woman a job when she had nothing else and had never once made her feel like she owed him anything for it. She pressed send. The recording left her phone. And somewhere across Phoenix, in an office where a federal investigator named Gerald Hooper had been building a case piece by careful piece for 14 months, a phone received a file that was 41 minutes long and absolutely clear. The engines idled on. The street held. And Travis Dalton, sitting in his office 6 miles away with a stolen folder of documents in front of him and 30 days' worth of certainty in his chest, had not yet received the news that the Tuesday he thought he had won had already turned against him. Gerald Hooper called back in 11 minutes. Madison knew it was him because Marcus's phone rang and Marcus looked at the screen and said, simply, "That was fast," and stepped away from the doorway to take it. She watched him from across the shop, the way his posture changed as he listened, the way he turned slightly so that what he was hearing could settle into him without distraction. He had the physical discipline of a man who had trained himself over a very long time not to react to things until he had fully understood them. But even from across the room, she could see the moment the information landed a subtle shift, a stillness that was different from his baseline stillness, the kind that meant something significant had just been confirmed. He came back to the counter. "Hooper's been working Dalton since the spring before last," Marcus said. "He's got affidavits from 2 shop owners in Maricopa County who were too afraid to go public but agreed to give sealed statements. He's got financial records showing money moving through 3 of Dalton's shell corporations in ways that don't survive a close look. What he didn't have was someone on the inside of one of Dalton's approaches. Someone who caught it in real time." He looked at Madison. "He called your recording the missing piece." Ethan, standing beside her, said nothing. "He wants to meet," Marcus continued. "Tonight, if possible. He wants Madison there." Madison nodded before she had consciously decided to. "Okay," she said. "He also wants the original phone," Marcus said. "The one with the recording, for chain of custody." "He can have it," Madison said. Marcus looked at her with that same measuring look he'd been giving her since he dismounted in front of the shop. "You understand what you're agreeing to," he said. It was not a question, but it had a question inside it, the kind that gave a person the space to reconsider without making reconsideration feel like failure. "I understand," Madison said. "He threatened Ethan's business. He threatened Luis and Davis and June, and 4 people I've never met who need their jobs. And he told me that people like them don't fight back." She met Marcus's eyes. "I want to be the reason that sentence stops being true." Ray Kowalski, still in his chair in the waiting area, made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when something moves them before language catches up. Outside, the engines were still running. The riders had not moved. Travis Dalton's office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix, in a suite with wide windows and a reception area that communicated, in every detail of its design, that the person who occupied it had arrived and intended to remain arrived. His assistant, a careful young man named Philip, who had learned in his first month on the job never to ask questions that weren't strictly necessary, had spent the last hour processing the documents Travis had brought back from the shop visit, organizing them the way Travis had instructed, flagging the specific paragraphs Travis had highlighted on the drive back. Travis had not told Philip what the documents were for. He rarely explained context. What Philip knew was that his employer had returned from an errand in a specific mood, not elated, not agitated, but contained. The particular containment of a man who has done something he believes will yield results in a predictable time frame and is now simply waiting for the predictable to occur. What Travis was actually thinking about, sitting in his office with the stolen folder in front of him and a glass of water at his elbow, was Madison Harper. He was thinking about the way she had stood behind that counter. He was a man who prided himself on reading people. It was central to his business model, the ability to assess, within the first 30 seconds of an interaction, the specific nature of someone's fear and the precise lever that would move them. He had looked at Madison Harper and had seen a young woman alone in a shop she didn't own, facing three men, with no obvious recourse and no visible backup. He had calibrated his approach accordingly. He had been confident in the calibration. She had not behaved like the calibration. He kept returning to the moment she had asked him how many other shop owners he had done this to. Not the fact of the question, but the tone of it. The tone had not been frightened or accusatory. It had been, he searched for the right word and settled on it with mild unease, investigative. She had asked it the way someone asks a question when they intend to use the answer for something. He picked up his phone and dialed Carl. Carl answered on the second ring. "The girl," Travis said, "the one in the shop. Did she make any calls while we were there?" A pause. "She was behind the counter the whole time. I didn't see her with her phone. Did you look?" Another pause, longer this time, with the specific texture of a man replaying a memory and not liking what he finds in it. "She had her hands on the counter," Carl said. "Both of them. When I came around, she stepped back. Her phone wasn't. I don't think she had it out." "You don't think," Travis said. Carl said nothing. Travis ended the call. He sat for a moment. Then he dialed his attorney. "I need to know the legal exposure on an unauthorized document retrieval," he said. When the attorney answered, "Hypothetically, if a party were to access business records from a property during a period when the primary owner was absent and a junior employee was present." His attorney, a measured man named Strand, who had been handling Travis's affairs for 6 years and who had developed, over those 6 years, a very specific skill for parsing his clients' hypotheticals into their actual factual foundations, said, "That would depend on whether the employee gave consent, whether the access was forcible, and whether anything was removed from the premises." "Documents were removed," Travis said. A pause. "Travis, hypothetically." "Hypothetically," Strand said carefully, "if documents were removed without consent, and if the employee's objection was on record in any form, verbal, witnessed, or recorded, you would be looking at potential charges that include theft of property, criminal trespass, and, depending on what was said during the interaction, possibly extortion or coercion." Travis went very still. "If recorded," he said. "If recorded," Strand said. "And if the recording captured explicit statements about financial leverage, business interference, or threats to the employee or owner, then yes, that would be significant." Travis said, "How significant?" "Federal significant," Strand said. "If it crossed state lines in intent or connected to other instances of similar conduct, it could constitute a RICO predicate." A pause. "Did she record it?" Travis thought about her hands on the counter. The way she had stepped back. The way she had asked him deliberate, paced, information-gathering questions for 41 minutes while appearing to do nothing except stand there and endure. "I don't know," he said. But his stomach knew. His stomach had known since about 15 minutes in the drive back, when he had replayed the conversation in his head and heard, underneath the surface of her apparent compliance, the architecture of something intentional. "Get me everything you can on Madison Harper," he said to Philip, who appeared in the doorway. "Employment history, background, who she knows." Philip nodded and disappeared. Travis stood. He walked to his window. 14 floors down, the city went about its business in the August heat, ordinary and indifferent. He had a bad feeling. Travis Dalton had operated for nearly 4 years on the bedrock certainty that the people he targeted would not fight back. It was not cruelty that had produced this certainty, or not only cruelty. It was data. He had done this across 4 counties, in varying configurations, targeting businesses with identifiable financial vulnerabilities and owners who lacked either the resources or the institutional trust to mount a meaningful response. 41 approaches. 37 successful acquisitions or forced sales. 4 owners who had pushed back in minor ways before ultimately capitulating. 0 who had turned it into something he could not manage. He had never once considered that the variable he was not accounting for was a 24-year-old clerk who had nothing to lose and whose mother had told her she was braver than she knew. Philip reappeared in the doorway. "There's not much," he said. "She's been in Phoenix about 16 months. Worked at a restaurant before Kohl's. No record, no prominent social connections." He hesitated. "One thing." "What?" "The shop Kohl's Custom Cycle works. There's some older activity in public records connected to the owner. Ethan Cole. He had some affiliation with." Philip checked his notes. "Hell's Angels. About 15 years ago. He left the club. It's old news." But what?" Philip looked uncomfortable. "There are about 60 motorcycles parked on the street outside this building," he said. "They weren't there when you went out at noon." Travis turned from the window. He looked at Philip. Philip said security mentioned it. "They've been there for about 20 minutes. They haven't done anything. They're just there." Travis walked to the window. 60 motorcycles, parked in an organized row on both sides of the street below his building. Riders still seated or standing next to their bikes, or leaning against them with the comfortable ease of people who had nowhere else they needed to be and no particular hurry about any of it. They were not looking up at his window. They did not need to. Their presence below it was the message, and the message was clear. "We know where you are." Travis's phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Unknown number," he answered. "Mr. Dalton," a voice said. Male, calm, unhurried. Not threatening in tone. Not anything in tone. "Really, except absolutely certain. My name isn't important. What's important is that I want to give you the opportunity to do the right thing before other people start making decisions for you." Travis kept his voice level. "I don't know who this is or what you think you're. The documents you took from Kohl's Custom Cycle Works this afternoon are stolen property," the voice said. "The statements you made to the employee during that visit have been recorded and are currently in the possession of federal investigators. The recording is 41 minutes long and is being described as complete and clear." A pause. "You have a window right now, Mr. Dalton. A small one. The kind that closes quickly and doesn't reopen. I'd strongly suggest you think carefully about how you want the next 48 hours to go." The line went dead. Travis stood at his window for a very long time. Below him, the motorcycles did not move. He called Strand back. "Whatever we talked about hypothetically," he said, "I need you in your car right now." Back at Kohl's Custom Cycle Works, Madison did not know about the phone call to Travis's building. She did not know about the 60 riders Marcus deployed to park below his office window. She found out about both of these things later. And when she did, she felt something complicated, not satisfaction exactly, but the particular sensation of a taut thing finally being allowed to release. What she knew. In the hours between sending the recording and sitting down across from Gerald Hooper that evening, was that the machinery of something much larger than the shop on the corner of a quiet Phoenix street had begun to turn. Ethan had called Luis and Davis in June. That was the first thing he did after Marcus had taken the call from Hooper and before the riders had deployed to the downtown office. He called each of them in turn, and Madison heard pieces of those conversations through the open door of the back office, not the words, mostly, but the rhythm of them. The careful pauses where Ethan was listening to fear on the other end of the line. The steady, unhurried quality of his voice when he responded, which did not promise more than he could deliver, but which communicated, in every syllable, that he was not calling to panic them. He was calling because they deserved to know, and because knowing was the first step toward not being afraid. Luis came to the shop. He was a barrel-chested man in his mid-50s, with grease permanently embedded in the creases of his knuckles and eyes that held the particular wariness of someone who had learned, in a country that was not his birth country, that institutions did not always move in your direction simply because you were in the right. He shook Ethan's hand. He shook Marcus's hand. He looked at Madison for a long moment and then extended his hand to her and said, "Dud, you're the one who stayed." "I'm the one who stayed," she said. "Good," Luis said. And he sat down next to Ray Kowalski in the waiting area, and the two of them proceeded to have a conversation that covered, in the span of about 15 minutes, 30 years of combined Phoenix experienced the city's changes, its losses, its stubborn insistence on persisting with the ease of two men who had never met before but shared enough reference to skip the introductory stages entirely. Davis came next. He was quieter than Luis, a lean man in his early 40s, who did upholstery work of a quality that was genuinely remarkable and who communicated primarily through what he chose not to say. He came in, assessed the room, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap and waited with the patience of a craftsman, someone accustomed to the discipline of holding still until the moment when action was correct. June did not come herself. She sent her assistant, a sharp young woman named Keisha, who took notes on her phone and asked 3 questions that were more penetrating than anything anyone else had asked all afternoon. One of those questions was directed at Marcus and concerned what, specifically, the riders parked outside were prepared to do legally versus what they were prepared to do in terms of sustained visible presence, and at what point those two categories intersected. Marcus looked at Keisha for a moment and then said, "Where'd June find you?" And Keisha said, "She made me," without any particular modesty, and Marcus said, "Good," in exactly the same tone Luis had used with Madison. Gerald Hooper arrived at the shop at 6:15. He was younger than Madison had expected, early 40s, with the build of someone who had been athletic once and had maintained enough of it to suggest it wasn't entirely behind him. He wore civilian clothes, not because he was trying to be inconspicuous, but because he had learned, after 14 months of working a case that moved primarily through the territory of small business owners who had deep-rooted reasons to distrust authority, that the presentation of authority was often the first obstacle to the information he needed. He drove his own car. He came alone. He knocked on the door of the shop before entering, which was a choice that Madison noticed and filed. He shook hands with Ethan first, then Marcus. Then he turned to Madison and said, "Ms. Harper, I've listened to your recording twice in the last 2 hours. I want to start by saying thank you." "You can thank me when it's done," Madison said. Hooper looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectations in real time. "Fair," he said. They sat Hooper across from Madison, Ethan and Marcus flanking her without being asked, Ray and Luis and Davis still in the waiting area like a quietly assembled jury. Keisha had called June to relay what was happening in real time, and June was apparently listening through the phone because occasionally Keisha would say something low into it, and there would be a response that animated Keisha's next question. Hooper laid it out. He had been building a case on Travis Dalton's operation since 14 months ago, when a shop owner in Glendale named Robert Featherstone had come to him, not to Hooper directly, but to a community legal aid organization that had connected to Hooper's unit. Featherstone had sold his shop under what he later described as unbearable pressure, and while he could articulate the pressure, he could not produce documentation of it because Travis's operation was designed specifically to leave no documentary trace of its coercive elements. The threats were verbal. The leverage was implied. The financial mechanisms were structured through layers of corporate paperwork that were legal on their surface and predatory in their application. "Dalton is not stupid," Hooper said. "He's been doing this for a long time and he's very good at it. He knows exactly how close to the line to operate. Everything he does exists in the space between what's provably criminal and what's merely ruthless." He paused. "Until today." He looked at the phone in Madison's hand. "What he said to you this afternoon, the explicit reference to other shop owners, the direct connection between the financial threats and the demand for document access. The statement that people like you don't fight back that language is what we've been missing. We've had the financial architecture. We've used the sealed statements from two other victims. We did not have him on record, making the explicit connection between his threats and his acquisitions. Your recording does that. Ethan said, how far does this go? Hooper was quiet for a moment. The shell corporations tie back to 3 investors, 2 of whom have connections to local political figures. This isn't just a predatory real estate operation. It's a network. And the network has been functional long enough that some of the people at the edges of it have gotten comfortable. He looked at Ethan. The balloon payment situation on your loan. That didn't happen by accident. There's a reason. First Regional is the lender on your property, and that reason has a name at the bank. The room absorbed that, Ray Kowalski said quietly. From the waiting area, how many shops? Hooper looked at him. That we can confirm? 19 in this county. We believe there are more across the state line. Luis made a sound. Davis put his hands on his knees. Keisha said something into her phone. 19 families, Marcus said. Not a question. A statement that placed the full weight of the number into the room. Some of them are gone, Hooper said. The businesses. Some of those people moved, started over somewhere else. Some of them are still here, working for the people who bought their properties. He paused. One of them is a woman in her 70s who ran a flower shop her late husband had built. She'd been in business for 31 years. She signed the papers 8 months ago because she didn't believe she had any other option. He looked at Madison. She's willing to go on record now. She's been waiting for someone else to go first. Madison thought about a 70-year-old woman in a flower shop that had belonged to her dead husband. She thought about 31 years. She thought about the specific courage it would take to decide, after watching your life's work be taken from you, that you were still willing to stand up in public and say what happened. Tell her she's not going first, Madison said. Tell her I already went. Hooper looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Madison had given Hooper the phone chain of custody, signed receipt, the specific language of a process that was going to proceed with or without Travis Dalton's cooperation. Hooper had explained what would happen next. In practical terms, a formal warrant for the documents Dalton had taken, a subpoena for the bank records involving First Regional, a contact to the 2 shop owners who had given sealed statements to ask whether they were willing to go public, now that the evidentiary picture had changed, and a call, already placed, to an attorney in the county DA's office who had been following Hooper's investigation and who had used the word finally twice in the conversation, which Hooper said was about as expressive as that office ever got. After Hooper left, the shop was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. It was the quiet of a space where the air pressure had changed, where something that had been building for a long time had found its direction and was now moving, and the people left in the room were processing the specific feeling of having set something in motion that was larger than any of them individually. Marcus sat on the edge of the counter. Ethan leaned against the doorframe of the back office. Ray and Luis were talking in low voices. Davis had his hands folded again. Keisha had stepped outside to call June with the full report. Madison stood in the middle of the shop and tried to figure out what she was feeling. It was not relief. Relief implied that the danger had passed, and the danger had not passed it, had simply changed shape, moved from the immediate physical presence of 3 men in a locked room to the slower, more complex machinery of an investigation and a legal process, and a man somewhere across the city who was now, presumably on the phone with his attorney, and understanding that the Tuesday he thought he had controlled had developed a significant structural problem. It was not triumph either. Triumph felt premature and also somehow beside the point. What she felt was more like purpose, the sense of being correctly placed in a moment, of having been exactly the right person in exactly the right place. Not because she was exceptional, but because she had been paying attention and had not looked away. Hey, Ethan said. She looked at him. You okay? Ask me in a week, she said. He almost smiled again. It was becoming a pattern, that almost smile. And she was beginning to understand that for Ethan Cole, almost was what full looked like, that his range of expression was compressed in the way of people who had spent years in situations where showing too much of yourself was a vulnerability you could not afford. In a week, he said, I'm going to owe you something I don't have a word for yet. You gave me a job when I had nothing, Madison said. We're a long way from even. Marcus, from the counter, said, she's right. You've always been terrible at accepting help. I accepted your help today, Ethan said. After how many years? Marcus said. I've been waiting by the phone since 2009. You have not been waiting by the phone, Ethan said. I absolutely have, Marcus said. Ask anybody, Lewis. From the waiting area said, I just met this man 2 hours ago, and I believe him completely. And the room, improbably, laughed. It was a short laugh, the spontaneous release of people who had been running on adrenaline and gravity for hours and had found, in an unexpected moment of ordinary human absurdity, a few seconds of something lighter. It did not last long. It was not supposed to last long, but it was real. And it was shared, and in the economy of terrible days, it was worth something. Outside, the sound of engines. The riders who had been parked on the street were beginning, in small groups, to pull away. They had been there for hours. They had not been asked to stay, and they were not being asked to leave. They were simply making the individual decisions that a large group makes when the moment that required their presence has, for now, resolved into the slower work that follows. Not all of them left. A dozen remained not as guards, exactly, but as witnesses, a visible reminder to anyone who happened to look at that corner of that block that Ethan Cole was not alone and had not been alone and would not be alone. Marcus watched them from the doorway. He said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, Dalton's going to move fast. He knows he's exposed. Ethan came to stand beside him. What kind of fast? He's going to try to get ahead of it, Marcus said. File something preemptive. Try to flip the narrative claim the documents were legitimately accessed. Try to discredit Madison's account. His attorney will look for any procedural angle that buys him time. He paused. He's done this long enough to know how to slow things down. Can he? Marcus considered this honestly. He can slow things down, he said. He cannot make that recording not exist. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we make sure everyone who needs to hear it hears it, he said, before he can build a wall around it. Marcus looked at him. You're thinking about going public. Hooper is going to move through official channels, Ethan said. That's right. That's how it has to work. But official channels have timelines, and Dalton has attorneys, and the people who lost their businesses in the last 4 years have already been waiting too long. He paused. I'm thinking there's more than one way to apply pressure. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The flower shop woman, he said, and the others, Ethan said. If Hooper's right that there are 19 we know about, there are people out there who've been carrying this alone, who don't know that someone finally caught it on tape, who've been waiting for someone to go first. He looked at Madison. Like you said. Madison had been listening. She thought about the woman with the flower shop. She thought about 31 years and a dead husband's life's work signed away on paper because the wall between you and the people threatening you felt too high to climb. If they're going to come forward, she said, they need to know it's safe to. They need to know that what happened today is real and is going to go somewhere. They need to see evidence that the system is actually moving. Then we make that visible, Marcus said. How? Madison said. Marcus looked at the riders still parked outside. He looked at the shop, at Ethan's shop, at the counter Madison had stood behind, at the back office door still hanging open, at the mismatched chairs in the waiting area where Ray and Luis and Davis had spent the afternoon bearing witness. He looked at all of it with the eyes of a man who understood. In his bones, that visible solidarity was not a performance. It was a statement of fact. It was the world being allowed to see what was true. The same way we showed up today, he said. We make it impossible to look away. Ethan put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. It was a brief gesture, a single grip, the kind that carries, in its brevity, everything that cannot be said without making it smaller. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. his face changed. It was not the change of a man receiving good news. It was the change of a man receiving information that reshuffled the board information, that made the situation simultaneously more complicated, and, in some way he was already processing, more clarifying. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, said 2 words, when, and hung up. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. Dalton didn't wait, Ethan said. He filed an emergency motion in civil court 20 minutes ago. He's claimed the documents are legally his under a loan. Co-signatory clause, he says, Strand drafted in 2021. He's alleging that I invited his access to the records and that Madison interfered with a legitimate business visit. He paused. And he's filed a counter-complaint against Madison for obstruction. The room went very still. Madison felt the floor shift. Not metaphorically, she felt it in her knees, the sudden physical response to information that arrived with force. He was coming after her, directly, using the one tool he had that she had not fully accounted for, the machinery of law as aggressive instrument, deployed not to establish truth, but to create enough noise and expense and procedural complexity that the truth became irrelevant before it could be heard. She had expected something. She had not expected it in 20 minutes. Ray Kowalski said, from the waiting area, what does that mean for the recording? Ethan looked at Madison. Marcus looked at Madison. And Madison, who had been afraid once today already, who had stood behind a counter with 3 men in a locked room and had decided that being afraid was not the same as being stopped, took a breath that was steadier than she felt and said, it means we move faster. Moving faster meant calling Hooper back before Marcus had finished dialing his own attorney. Madison made the call herself. She used Ethan's landline because her phone was already in Hooper's possession, and she was not going to let Travis Dalton's 20-minute countermove make her feel like she had lost something. Hooper picked up on the first ring, which told her he had either been expecting the call or had not yet put his phone down from the last one. He filed, she said. I know, Hooper said. Strand called the DA's office 6 minutes ago. He's claiming co-signatory rights on the loan documents and framing the shop visit as a routine business access. A pause. The obstruction complaint against you is designed to muddy the chain of custody on the recording. If he can get a judge to question how and why you made it, he creates doubt about its admissibility. Can he do that? He can try, Hooper said. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings. You were a party to the conversation. You had every legal right to record it. His argument has problems and Strand knows it. Another pause. But problems take time to resolve. And time is what he's buying. How much time? Emergency motions in civil court can create injunctions inside 48 hours if the judge is sympathetic. There's one judge in this district who has ruled favorably for Strand's clients 3 times in the 2 years. If Dalton draws that judge.
What happens to the federal case if there's a civil injunction?
Hooper was quiet for exactly the length of time that told Madison the question was more complicated than she wanted it to be. The federal case moves on its own track, he said. A civil injunction in state court doesn't technically stop a federal investigation, but it creates a legal fog. It gives Dalton's team grounds to argue parallel proceedings, to file motions about evidence contamination. It won't kill the case. It will make it slower and more expensive and give him time to pressure the sealed witnesses. He stopped. The 2 shop owners who gave sealed statements, if Dalton's team identifies them before we go public, he can approach them again. He's done it before. 2 of the 19 we know about recanted after initial contact with investigators. We believe that recantation was not voluntary. The room was listening. All of it. Ray and Luis and Davis in the waiting area, Marcus in the doorway, Ethan standing completely still with his arms at his sides. Keisha no longer on the phone with June, because June had apparently decided that secondhand information was insufficient and had arrived at the shop herself, a compact woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair and reading. Glasses pushed up on her forehead and the immediate orienting presence of someone who ran a business and employed 4 people and had not gotten this far by waiting for other people to tell her what was happening. June looked at Madison as Madison listened to Hooper. The look was not assessing. It was recognizing. What do you need from us right now? Madison asked Hooper. I need the other victims contacted before Dalton can reach them, Hooper said. I have names and general locations for most of them, but I can't approach them officially, not yet, not until the warrant clears. If someone they trust, someone connected to the community, could make contact first and explain the situation. How many of the 19, 11 are still in the Phoenix metro area? The others relocated. He paused. The flower shop woman, her name is Dorothy Caswell. She lives in Tempe. She is the one I'm most concerned about. Dalton's team will identify her quickly because her case was the most documented. Of the group, she had an attorney during the sale who, we discovered later, had a financial relationship with one of Dalton's investors. Her own attorney was working against her, Madison said. Yes, Hooper said, she doesn't know that yet. Madison closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them. Send me the addresses, she said. Send them to Ethan's email. We'll make contact tonight. Hooper said. Ms. Harp tonight, she said. Before he does. She hung up. The room looked at her. He's got 11 people in Phoenix he can get to before Dalton's team does, she said. We need to get there first. Tonight. She looked at Marcus. How many riders do you have who can drive? Marcus looked at her with the expression he had been wearing all evening, the one that was perpetually recalibrating upward. All of them, he said. I need 11, she said. 11 people who can go to 11 different addresses, knock on 11 different doors, and tell 11 different people that they are not alone and that what happened to them is going to be answered for. People who can do that without making them more afraid than they already are. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Marcus. Not people who look like trouble, Madison said. People who look like she searched for it. Like someone actually came. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Within 20 minutes, the shop had transformed into something between a command center and a kitchen table, meeting the specific organized chaos of people working fast toward a shared purpose without the luxury of formality. Ethan's laptop was open on the counter with Hooper's email pulled up. 11 addresses distributed by hand on torn pieces of register tape because that was what was available, and nobody had time to find anything better. Marcus had made 2 calls and 6 additional riders had come back, men and women ranging in age from late 30s to well past 60. People with the weathered, certain quality of lives that had been lived fully and without apology. Each of them received an address and a brief. Marcus walked each one through what to say. My name is. I'm here because a woman named Madison Harper caught the man who took your business on tape today. There's a federal investigation. You are not alone. If you're willing, we'd like you to hear what happened. Simple. Direct. True. June stood beside Madison while Marcus gave the briefings. The woman with the flower shop, June said. Dorothy Caswell. Hooper's most worried about her, Madison said. I know Dorothy, June said. Madison looked at her. We were in the same church for 11 years, June said. She stopped coming after she lost the shop. I didn't know why. Not specifically, not until tonight. Something moved through her face. I thought she was grieving her husband. He'd been gone 3 years by then. I thought the shop had just gotten too hard. She paused. I didn't ask her directly. I should have. You didn't know, Madison said. No, June said. But she was alone with it for 8 months because nobody knew to ask. She straightened. I want to go to her myself. Not a rider she doesn't know. Me, Madison looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at June. You know her well enough that she'll open the door, he said. She'll open the door, June said. Then go, Marcus said. But go now. Dalton's team is already in motion. June took the address from the register tape list and was gone within 30 seconds of being told to go. She did not ask for a car because she had driven herself, and she did not take anyone with her because Dorothy Caswell was a woman who had been frightened once already by people arriving in force, and the last thing she needed was to open her door at 7 in the evening to a crowd. Ethan watched her go. Then he did something that surprised Madison. He took off his work apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. He looked at the shop, at everything it was, and everything it represented. The life he had built from the particular rubble, of a past he had left behind, and then he looked at Madison. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't mean anything," she said. "I do," he said. "You went to bat for this place without knowing the full story. You deserve the full story." The shop had quieted enough riders out on their missions. Ray and Luis and Davis still present, but moved to the far end of the waiting area in the instinctive courtesy of people who recognize that some conversations require a smaller room. Marcus had stepped outside to coordinate. Ethan and Madison were as close to alone as they had been since he walked back in at 3:12 that afternoon and found the back office door open. Ethan pulled a stool to the counter, sat on it. He was not a man who sat easily. He moved through the world in a way that suggested he was always either working or ready to work, but he sat now with the deliberate weight of a man settling in too. Say something he had been not saying for a long time. "I was with the Angels from my mid-20s to my early 40s, he said. "That's almost 20 years. I'm not going to tell you it was all wrong, because I didn't experience it that way, and I won't pretend I did. There was brotherhood in it. Real brotherhood. The kind that meant when your back was against the wall, people showed up. Literally showed up the way they showed up today." He looked at his hands. "But there were other parts of it that I knew, somewhere I knew, were pulling me away from the person I decided I wanted to be when I was young. And when I hit 40, I made a decision." "You left," Madison said. "I left," he said. "Properly. With the blessing of the people I respected and the understanding of the ones I didn't. And I built this." He gestured, meaning the shop, meaning the corner, meaning the building next door with Luis's machine shop and Davis's upholstery and June's alterations and the 4 employees who depended on all of it. "I wanted to prove to myself that I could be useful in a quieter way, that I could be the kind of place people came to for something simple and left from having gotten it." Madison said nothing. She was listening in the way she had learned to listen to Ethan, with attention to what was under the words, not just what was in them. "What I didn't anticipate," Ethan said, "was that the thing I built would become something worth taking, and that the person who decided to take it would be exactly the kind of man I spent my 20s and 30s dealing with in very different ways." He paused. "When Travis first approached me 14 months ago, my first instinct was not to call an attorney. My first instinct was the instinct of the person I used to be." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't act on it. I filed it away. And I called an attorney, and I declined his offers, and I believed that the right way to handle it was through patience and procedure." He stopped. "I was wrong about the patience. I should have seen where it was going faster." "You couldn't have known he was going to come in here today," Madison said. "No," Ethan said, "but I should have told you more. You were in this place every day. You were alone in it today. That's on me." Madison thought about what to say to that. She thought about the fact that she had been alone before, in many senses of the word, and that aloneness had stopped feeling like a state that could be fixed by information, and had started feeling like simply the conditions she worked within. "I wasn't alone," she said finally. "Not really. I had your notebook." Ethan stared at her. "That sounds insane," she said. "A little," he said, and the almost smile again, but wider this time, closer to the real thing, and she understood that was as much as she was going to get, and that it was, in its own way, exactly enough. Marcus came back through the door. His phone was in his hand, and his expression had the specific quality of someone carrying 2 pieces of news simultaneously, one good, one not. "First contact reports are coming in," he said. 6 of the 11 reached someone at home. 3 are willing to talk to Hooper. 1, he checked his phone. Man named Benito Aguilar. Ran a welding shop in Mesa. He didn't just say yes. He said he's been ready for this for 2 years and asked if he could bring his brother-in-law, who's an attorney. Ethan said, "What's the not good part?" "Dalton's team already got to 2 of them," Marcus said. "The addresses at the bottom of Hooper's list. Strand's office called them this afternoon. Before we even knew the list existed, one of them hung up. The other one," he paused. "The other one agreed to sign something Strand sent over by email. Recantation of previous statement, amended account of the original transaction. The room absorbed this." "He already knew the list," Madison said. "It was not a question." It was the moment of understanding clicking into place. Hooper's list Dalton's team already had the same names. Because someone in the investigation, we don't know that, Marcus said carefully. Then how did Strand know which two to call this afternoon? Before the warrant, before any of this went public. She looked at Ethan. Someone told him. Ethan was very still. Hooper needs to know this, he said. Yes, Marcus said, he does. And I already called him. His jaw was tight. He's looking into it. He said, and I'm quoting him, that this is not the first time something has moved faster than it should have in this case. The implications of that settled over the room like a change in temperature. If there was a leak in Hooper's investigation, if Dalton had eyes inside the process that was supposed to bring him down, then the 41-minute recording, now in federal custody, was potentially less safe than it had felt 45 minutes ago when Madison handed the phone across a counter and felt certain she had done the right thing. Ray Kowalski said, from the waiting area, in the voice of a man who had spent 30 years delivering mail in every kind of neighborhood and had developed a very direct relationship with the practical, what does that mean for the girl? Everyone understood what Ray meant by the girl. Marcus said, it means she shouldn't go home tonight. Madison looked at him. I'm not going to let him run me out of my apartment. I'm not suggesting that, Marcus said. I'm suggesting that until we know the shape of the leak, we don't know what Dalton knows about you, where you live, whether Strand has been building a file. He met her eyes. Not forever tonight. She stays here, Ethan said. It was not a suggestion. It was the announcement of a decision that had already been made. Upstairs, I've got a room. It's not much, but it's mine and it's safe. Madison started to argue, and then stopped. She stopped because the part of her that had been running on principle all day, the part that said, I will not be moved. I will not be frightened into accommodation. I will stand my ground, was in conversation with a different part. The part that was 24 years old and tired, and had been alone in a locked room with 3 men that afternoon, and had done everything right and was only now, in the settling quiet of the evening, beginning to feel the full weight of what the day had contained. She said, okay tonight. Marcus nodded. Then his phone rang again. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face, a quick, bright movement, the specific animation of unexpected good news arriving in the middle of a hard night. He answered. Listen for about 20 seconds. Then he said, tell her we're here. Tell her to come. He hung up. That was June, he said. Dorothy, Madison said. Dorothy Caswell, Marcus said, did not need to be persuaded. The moment June told her what happened, told her about the recording, told her that Madison had stood in that shop alone and caught Travis Dalton on tape, she said, and I'm told these are her exact words. I have been waiting 8 months for someone to tell me that man is going to answer for what he did. Tell me where to go. Luis, from across the room, said something in Spanish that Madison did not catch, but that made Davis, sitting next to him, close his eyes briefly, in what looked like relief. She's coming here, Marcus said. Tonight, Ethan said. In about 40 minutes, Marcus confirmed. And she's bringing something. June says she has documentation, her own documentation, kept privately, separate from what her attorney handled. Correspondence she saved. Notes she made at the time. She said she didn't trust the attorney, but she didn't know why until tonight, and she kept copies of everything because her husband had always told her to keep copies of everything, and she had decided, when he died, that she would keep listening to his advice. Madison thought about a woman she had never met, sitting in a house in Tempe for 8 months with a folder of copies she had kept because her dead husband had told her to, waiting for someone to come. She had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Ethan said quietly, you okay? I'm good, she said. Give me a second. He gave her a second. Then Hooper called back. He did not call Ethan's landline. He called Marcus's cell, which meant he had been paying attention to who was coordinating, which in turn meant he was paying attention in a way that was more than procedural. Marcus handed the phone to Madison without being asked. Miss Harper, Hooper said, I owe you directness. Yes, she said. You do. There is an internal review being initiated tonight regarding case communications, he said. I can't tell you more than that. What I can tell you is that your recording has been duplicated, and the duplicates are in the possession of 3 separate members of my team in 3 separate locations. Whatever Dalton's team may know or may have access to, the recording exists in multiple places that cannot be reached by a single action. He can't make it disappear, she said. He cannot make it disappear, Hooper said. And the counter-complaint against you, I've spoken to the assistant DA. It won't survive contact with the actual facts. The one-party consent law, the chain of custody, the content of the recording itself. Strand built that complaint for delay, not for victory. And the assistant DA is not going to let it delay anything meaningful. How soon can you move on the warrant? The warrant for the documents Dalton took from the shop was signed 40 minutes ago, Hooper said. Officers will be at Strand's office when it opens tomorrow morning. A pause. And Ms. Harper Benito Aguilar's brother-in-law is an attorney named Victor Reyes. I know that name. He's handled civil rights litigation for 20 years, and he has been looking for a case that opens this specific door for a long time. If he's coming in on Aguilar's behalf, the scope of what this becomes changes significantly. Madison absorbed this. In what direction? In the direction of every person Dalton has done this to, Hooper said. Not just prosecution, civil liability, restitution. A pattern of conduct claim that could, if Reyes builds it right, reach back 4 years and implicate every party in the network. He paused. The investors, the bank contacts, all of it. The room was listening. All of it again. Dorothy Caswell is coming in tonight, Madison said. She has her own documentation, kept privately. Hooper was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed by 1 degree just. But it was the degree that meant what he said next mattered more than what he usually said. Her case is the one I've wanted from the beginning, he said. Her attorney's conflict of interest, documented and on record, changes the legal architecture of every transaction that attorney touched. If she has copies. She has copies, Madison said. Her husband told her to keep copies of everything. A long pause. I'm going to come back tonight, Hooper said. We'll be here, Madison said. She handed the phone back to Marcus. She looked around the room at Ethan and Marcus and Ray and Luis and Davis. At the open back office door, at the counter she had stood behind that afternoon when 3 men walked into a locked shop and believed they had already won. She thought about Travis Dalton in his office, on the 14th floor, looking down at 60 motorcycles parked below his window, calling Strand, filing emergency motions, trying to build a wall fast enough to stay ahead of what was moving toward him. She thought about the flower shop woman in Tempe, sitting in a car with June right now, 40 minutes away, with a folder of copies she had kept for 8 months because her dead husband's voice in her head had told her to. She thought about Benito Aguilar, who had been ready for 2 years. She thought about the 17 others, the ones still out there, scattered across the metro area and beyond, carrying what had been done to them in the specific private way of people who had decided, for whatever reason, that the wall was too high, and the risk was too great, and the silence was better than the alternative. Some of them would come forward now. Some would not. Some would decide that what Madison had done created enough safety to take the step they had not taken alone. Some would still be afraid. She understood both. She held no judgment for either. But she thought about what Hooper had said. She was waiting for someone to go first. She had gone first. She had gone first. Not because she was the bravest person in any room she had ever been in. She was not. She had gone first because she had been in the right place and had paid enough attention and had refused, in the moment that mattered, to believe that staying silent was the safer choice. The safer choice was not actually safer. It only looked that way from the outside of the moment. From inside it, the safer choice was the one that did not require you to become someone you could not respect when you thought about it afterward. Ethan said, "You should eat something." "I've got food upstairs," Ray Kowalski said. "I'll stay until Hooper gets back." Luis said, "Me too." Davis unfolded his hands and stood up and said, "I'll make coffee." And because nobody knew where the coffee was in Ethan's back room, Ethan went to show him. And for a moment, the shop was filled with the sound of 2 men moving around a small space looking for filters and a measuring spoon, which was possibly the most ordinary sound Madison had heard all day, and therefore the most disorienting. Marcus sat down on the edge of the counter, where he had been sitting on and off for hours. He looked tired for the first time, not beaten, not diminished, but carrying the pleasant fatigue of a man who has done something real and is allowing his body to register it. "You did good today," he said to Madison. "I want to make sure someone says that plainly, while there's still time before the next wave." "You think there's another wave," she said. "There's always another wave," Marcus said. "Dalton's cornered, but he's not done. Cornered men with money and attorneys are the most dangerous kind because they have something to protect and the tools to protect it. He's going to come at this case every way he can." He looked at her. "But here's what he doesn't understand." "What?" "He made it about you," Marcus said. "The counter-complaint. Attacking your credibility. Trying to make you the story instead of the recording." He shook his head slowly. "You can't make a woman who stood alone in a locked room and outsmarted 3 men, and then handed her evidence to federal investigators, and then spent her evening reaching out to 19 strangers. You cannot make that woman the villain. It doesn't hold. People understand what they see." Madison thought about this. "He doesn't know yet," she said about Dorothy. "No," Marcus said. "When he finds out she's coming in, he'll know it's over," Marcus said simply. "He might keep fighting. Men like him usually do, because stopping feels like admitting something they don't have the language to admit. But he'll know." The coffee finished brewing. Davis appeared in the doorway of the back room and held up a mug with the expression of a man who had completed a task and was prepared to do it again as many times as necessary. Ray accepted the first cup, Luis accepted the second, and then the front door of Cole's Custom Cycle Works opened, and June walked in. Behind her, moving carefully, was a woman in her early 70s with white hair and a coat she had put on out of habit despite the August heat, and a large manila envelope held against her chest, with both arms held the way you hold something you have been keeping safe for a long time and have not yet decided it is safe to set down. Dorothy Caswell looked at the shop. She looked at the people in it. Her eyes moved to Madison, and she held on her for a moment with the specific look of someone identifying, across a room, the person who started something they had been waiting for. She crossed to the counter. She set the envelope down. She said, "My husband's name was George. He built our shop in 1989. He worked on it with his own hands. He told me once that it wasn't about the shop, it was about proving that what you built with integrity could last." Her voice was steady. It had the particular steadiness of grief that has been lived with long enough to become structural. "Travis Dalton took it 8 months ago, and I signed the papers because I didn't believe anyone was coming." She looked at Madison. "I'm here because someone came." Madison looked at the envelope. She looked at Dorothy Caswell. She looked at the room full of people who had spent a Tuesday afternoon in August refusing to let one man's certainty become their reality. And she said, "Let's show Hooper what you've got." Dorothy Caswell's envelope contained 43 pages. Hooper arrived at the shop at 8:40 that evening and sat down across from Dorothy at the counter, the same counter Madison had stood behind that afternoon, the same glass surface Travis Dalton had put his hands on when he believed he was explaining to a young woman how the world worked. Hooper did not rush Dorothy. He did not perform impatience. He let her open the envelope herself, remove the pages herself, organize them in the order she had decided on, which was not chronological, but was instead arranged by the logic of someone who had spent 8 months living with this material and understood its internal geography better than anyone else in the room. The first page was a handwritten note. Dorothy set it on the counter and smoothed it flat with her palm. "That's from my attorney," she said, "Richard Bauer. He wrote it to me the week before I signed the papers. He told me the offer was the best I was going to get, and that if I didn't take it, the licensing complications would cost me more in legal fees than the property was worth." She paused. "I kept it because something in the wording felt wrong to me. I didn't know why then. I know why now." Hooper looked at the note without touching it. "The wording," he said. "He used the phrase 'we have confirmed' in reference to the licensing problem," Dorothy said. I didn't ask him to confirm anything with anyone. I didn't authorize any communication with Dalton's side. But he wrote, "We have confirmed," as if it were a mutual finding. She looked at Hooper. "That's not what your own attorney writes to you. That's what someone writes when they've been talking to the other side." Hooper picked up the note. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Dorothy Caswell with the expression of a man who had spent 14 months looking for the piece that would open the entire case and was now looking at it. "Mrs. Caswell," he said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer it the same way." "Go ahead," Dorothy said. "Did Richard Bauer ever receive payment from any entity connected to Travis Dalton or his companies?" Dorothy reached into the envelope and produced page 7. It was a bank statement. It had certain lines highlighted in yellow, the yellow of a marker that had been applied carefully, months ago, by a woman sitting alone in a house in Tempe who did not know exactly what she was looking for, but had been looking anyway because her husband had told her to keep copies, and her husband had never been wrong. "I don't know whose name is on the account that sent it," Dorothy said, "but I know that Richard Bauer received a wire transfer of $14,000 11 days before I signed those papers. And I know it didn't come from me." The room went absolutely still. Hooper stared at the page. Marcus, standing 3 feet away, said nothing. Ethan, beside him, said nothing. Madison, watching from the end of the counter, felt something move through her chest that was not quite triumph and was not grief, but contained elements of both the specific sensation of understanding, fully and completely, the depth of what had been done to a woman who had simply been trying to hold on to something her husband built. "Mrs. Caswell," Hooper said, and his voice had changed. "This is potentially the most significant document in this investigation." Dorothy nodded once. "I know," she said. "That's why I kept it." What happened in the next 4 hours happened fast. Hooper made calls from the corner of the shop, speaking in the controlled, precise language of a man activating processes that had been waiting for exactly this material. Victor Reyes, Benito Aguilar's brother-in-law, arrived at 9:15 with a legal pad already filled and the specific energy of a civil rights attorney who has just been handed the lever he has been waiting for. He shook Dorothy's hand with both of his, which was not a performed gesture, but the genuine acknowledgement of one person to another that what they were holding mattered. Reyes looked at the bank statement for 45 seconds. Then he looked at Hooper. "Attorney fraud," he said. "Procurement of signature under fraudulent counsel. Every transaction Bauer touched in connection with Dalton's acquisitions is now potentially reversible." He paused. "How many of the 19 used Bauer?" Hooper checked his notes. 6 confirmed. 6 reversible transactions, Reyes said. "Not a celebration, a calculation, immediate and practical. The way a craftsman looks at material and sees what can be made from it. And if we can show a pattern of referral that Dalton's team was systematically directing vulnerable property owners toward compromised attorneys, we can show it," Hooper said. "We've had a financial connection between Bauer and one of Dalton's investors for 8 months. We could never get it into the case cleanly without the predicate. This is the predicate." Madison was listening from the end of the counter, arms folded, watching the two of them the way you watch people build something in real time. She felt Ethan come to stand beside her. "You understand what's happening," he said quietly. "The whole thing is unraveling," she said. "Not just Dalton, the whole network." "Yes," Ethan said. "Because Dorothy kept copies," Madison said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Because George Caswell told his wife to keep copies of everything," he said. "And she listened to him even after he was gone." Madison had to look away for a second. She looked at the ceiling, at the industrial lighting of the shop, at the ordinary functional overhead structure of a place where motorcycles got fixed and coffee got made, and a retired postal worker and a welder and an upholstery man had spent a Tuesday afternoon sitting in mismatched chairs because a 24-year-old clerk had decided not to move. She thought about her mother. She thought about the last conversation she'd had with her in the hospital room, the one about courage, about being braver than you know. She had not understood it then as instruction. She understood it now as prophecy, not the mystical kind, but the practical kind, The kind that comes from a mother who has watched her daughter for 24 years and knows, with the accuracy of intimacy, what that daughter is capable of and what she will need to be told before the moment comes. She had been told. She had remembered. At 10:47, Hooper received a call that changed the texture of the night again. He stepped into the back office to take it. Madison watched the door. She had learned to read the quality of Hooper's exits, the angle of his shoulders, the speed of his movement, what his face did in the half-second before he posed it for professional neutrality. This exit was fast, and his face had done something quick and unguarded before he pulled the door behind him. Marcus noticed too. He looked at Madison. She looked back at him. They waited. Hooper came out in 4 minutes. Travis Dalton voluntarily surrendered to federal custody 20 minutes ago, he said. The counter, the chairs, the waiting area. The whole shop held its breath. His attorney Strand called the U.S. Attorney's office at 9:50 and indicated his client wished to cooperate. Hooper said, "They're calling it voluntary. What it actually is a man who looked at the totality of what was assembled against him in the last 8 hours and made a calculation." He paused. "The civil motion he filed this afternoon has been withdrawn." Ray Kowalski, who had not moved from his chair in 6 hours, exhaled so audibly that Luis patted him on the shoulder. "The obstruction complaint against Madison," Marcus said. "Withdrawn with the motion," Hooper said. It was always a pressure tactic. Without the leverage of the emergency injunction, it had no purpose. He looked at Madison directly. "You're clear." Madison said nothing for a moment. She was processing. Not the legal outcome that she had understood was coming, had believed it was coming, even when Travis filed his counter move, because the recording existed and the facts existed, and those two things together were not the kind of thing that could be indefinitely managed. What she was processing was something quieter, the specific feeling of a day that had begun as an ordinary Tuesday and had required, somewhere in its middle hours, everything she had, every bit of the courage she had been told she possessed and had not been entirely sure of until she needed it and had come out the other side of it with the thing intact that mattered most. Herself, who she was, what she had decided she was going to be. Dorothy Caswell at the counter was holding her envelope with both hands again. "Does this mean I get my shop back?" she asked. Reyes turned to her. "That is exactly what this means," he said. "Not today, not next week. This is going to take time and process and work, but the transaction is legally reversible. The fraud on the part of your attorney makes the signature voidable. And I'm going to spend the next several months making sure that every court that needs to understand that does." He paused. "You have my word." Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly and with absolute steadiness, "My husband would have liked you." Reyes said, "I would have liked to meet him." Dorothy folded her hands over the envelope. She did not cry. She had the composure of someone who had already done their crying alone, in private, over months, and had arrived at this room already through the worst of it, and ready now for what came after. It was Marcus who noticed first. He was standing near the front door, and he heard it before anyone else, the sound building outside. The particular deepening vibration that Madison had first heard that afternoon and had felt in her chest before she understood what it was. He turned toward the door. "What is that?" Davis said. Marcus opened the front door. The street had filled again. Not 60 this time. Not 195 the way the story would later be told. The number that would appear in the coverage and become the shorthand for what happened on a Tuesday in August in Phoenix, Arizona, though it was close. What Madison saw when she came to stand in the doorway beside Marcus was the street in both directions holding more riders than she could count in a single look, engines idling, headlights cutting the evening dark, the whole assembled mass of it existing with the same disciplined, purposeful quiet it had held that afternoon. Not chaos, not a mob, a statement, a visible, undeniable, impossible to look away from statement. Someone had put the word out. Marcus had not done it. She looked at him, and he shook his head slightly, answering the question before she asked it. The word had moved through channels she didn't have full visibility into, through the specific speed of communities that communicate along lines of loyalty rather than technology. Something had happened at Kohl's today. Travis Dalton had surrendered, and the people who had shown up that afternoon had told other people, and those people had come. Ethan came to stand in the doorway beside her. He looked at the street. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't want this kind of thing again." "I know," Marcus said. "I spent 15 years building away from it." "I know," Marcus said again. "But Ethan, you understand that what you built is why they're here. Not the old life, this." He gestured at the shop, at the block, at Luis's machine shop, and Davis's upholstery and June's alterations, and the whole quiet, decent, persistent fact of the life Ethan Cole had constructed from the materials of integrity and time. "They're not here for who you were. They're here for what you made." Ethan looked at him. Something moved through his face. Through the controlled, compressed, carefully managed surface of a man who had learned, over decades, to keep the most important things from showing. It moved through anyway, because some things are too large for the management of them. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus put his hand over Ethan's. Neither of them spoke. Ray Kowalski came to stand behind them in the doorway. Then Luis, then Davis, then June, who had been on her phone updating her employees, who had apparently all decided that whatever was happening at the shop was more important than the rest of their evening and were on their way. Reyes stood with his legal pad. Hooper stood with his phone. And Dorothy Caswell, with her envelope, moved through the group and came to stand at the front of the doorway and looked at the street full of riders and looked at it with the expression of a woman who had spent 8 months believing that no one was going to come. They had come. They were still coming, she said very softly. To no one in particular, George would have wanted to see this. Madison heard her. She was standing 2 feet away. She said, "I think he did see it." Dorothy looked at her. Madison said, "I think the people who love us don't stop paying attention just because they're gone. I think they stay close to the moments that matter." She paused. "That's what I choose to believe, anyway." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took Madison's hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. The simple, direct way of one woman to another when words are not the right instrument. They stood like that for a while. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were never going to be simple. Travis Dalton entered a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office that required him to provide full documentation of every transaction in his acquisition network going back 4 years. The cooperation agreement was not a gift. It was extracted methodically by a federal prosecutor who understood that Dalton's value as a cooperating witness was limited only by the completeness of his cooperation, and who made that limitation very clear. Strand negotiated the terms, and Strand knew from the moment Dorothy Caswell's bank statement entered the federal case file that his client's strongest available move was to be more useful than he was culpable. Richard Bauer surrendered his law license before the state bar formally moved against him. 2 of Dalton's Shell Corporation investors' men, whose names had appeared in Hooper's financial analysis for months without sufficient predicate to act on, were named as defendants in a civil RICO action filed by Victor Reyes on behalf of 11 of the 19 original victims. The action sought damages, restitution, and in 6 cases, including Dorothy Caswell's, the reversal of fraudulent property transfers. The judge who oversaw the emergency hearing on Dalton's original civil motion, the one who had ruled favorably for Strand's clients 3 times before recused herself after a judicial review inquiry was opened, regarding her connection to one of the investor defendants. The inquiry had been initiated by information that came indirectly from Hooper's internal leak investigation, which had identified a junior analyst in the federal office who had been providing case updates to an attorney with ties to Strand's firm. The analyst resigned. The attorney was referred for bar investigation. Ethan's balloon payment was addressed through a combination of a bank error, Correction First Regional's internal audit, triggered by the federal subpoena of its records, identified 3 irregular fees applied to Ethan's account over 2 years that reduced his principal balance by more than either side had initially understood, and a short-term bridge arrangement that Marcus organized through a network of individuals who had, collectively, both the means and the desire to ensure that Cole's custom cycle works remained where it was. Luis's machine shop stayed. Davis's upholstery stayed. June's alterations shop not only stayed, but added a fifth employee in October, a young woman named Priya, who had been referred by Keisha and who turned out to have a gift for beadwork that June said she had not seen in 30 years of running the business. Dorothy Caswell got her flower shop back. The transfer was completed on a Thursday morning in November in a county clerk's office where the air conditioning was set too high and the fluorescent lights hummed and the carpet was the specific shade of government gray that communicated nothing about the significance of the transactions it witnessed daily. Dorothy signed her name. She signed it with the pen she had brought from home, a pen that had belonged to George, an ordinary ballpoint he had used for years to sign his own paperwork that she had kept on her desk since he died and had brought today specifically because she wanted his handwriting and her handwriting to be in the same room when it happened. Victor Reyes was there. June was there. Madison was there. When Dorothy set the pen down, she looked at the clerk across the desk, a young man, early 20s, clearly uncertain about the appropriate response to an elderly woman who was looking at a property transfer document with an expression that was not entirely describable in professional terms, and she said, "My husband built this from nothing 31 years ago. He said anything built with integrity could last." The clerk said, "Yes, ma'am," in the tone of someone who understood he was in the presence of something he would think about later. Dorothy looked at Madison. "It lasted," she said. "The hearing in which Travis Dalton's cooperation agreement was formalized and the charges against him were entered was not public theater. It was procedurally ordinary, a courtroom, attorneys, a judge, language precise enough to leave no interpretive space. Madison attended as a listed witness. She sat in the gallery and watched Travis Dalton enter in civilian clothes, flanked by Strand, and take his seat without looking at the gallery. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. Physically, he was the same man who had put his hands on her counter and spoken about patterns and small ones who don't fight. But the authority he had carried, the specific mass of a man whose certainty had never been tested, was not there anymore. What remained was simply a person in a room where the facts had been arranged in a way he could not rearrange, and who had run out of space between himself and the consequences of what he had chosen to do with his life. He never looked at her. She had expected to feel something specific when she saw him: anger, maybe, or satisfaction, or the completion of something that had been unresolved. What she actually felt was simpler and quieter than any of those. She felt that she had done her part, that the things she had been asked to do by the moment, by circumstance, by whatever combination of preparation and courage and stubbornness, had produced the version of herself who had stood behind that counter and refused to move. She had done it completely. The rest was process. Important process, necessary process, process she would support in every way asked of her. But hers was done. She looked at Travis Dalton one last time. Then she looked away. After the hearing, Marcus found her in the hallway. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like I want coffee," she said. He laughed, a real laugh, short and genuine, the laugh of a man who had been expecting an answer and been given a better one. "Come on," he said. "Ethan's outside." Ethan was leaning against his truck in the courthouse parking lot, hands in his pockets, doing the thing he did where he looked at nothing in particular while thinking about everything relevant. He straightened when he saw her. "Well," he said. "It's done," she said. He nodded. "Good." She looked at him. "Are you okay?" He thought about this in the way he thought about things, fully, without rushing the answer. "I think," he said slowly, "that I spent 15 years believing that the life I left behind was something I had to be careful about. Something that might come back and undo what I'd built if I let it get too close." He paused. "Today I'm thinking that's not exactly right. What came back today wasn't a threat. It was." He stopped. "I don't have a word for it." "Completion," Madison said. He looked at her. "The thing you were before and the thing you built after." she said. They're the same thing. They were always the same thing. Just different chapters. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Your mother, he said. She sounds like she was something. Madison felt the familiar weight of it, the loss that never went away but had changed shape over the months into something she could carry without stopping. She was, she said. She told me I was braver than I knew. She was right, Ethan said. She usually was, Madison said. Marcus was standing nearby, looking at the courthouse, giving them their space, without making a performance of it. He had that quality, the ability to be present and peripheral simultaneously, the discipline of a man who knew when a moment belonged to other people. He turned back to them. There's going to be press, he said. Hooper's office is releasing a statement. The civil filing is public record. It's going to get attention. He looked at Madison. Your name is in it. I know, she said. How do you feel about that? She had thought about this. She had thought about it specifically since Hooper told her 2 weeks ago that her name would be part of the public record, and that depending on how the coverage moved, she might find herself in the position of having to speak publicly about what she had done. She had thought about what it meant to be known for this thing this one afternoon. This one decision, this refusal to move from behind a counter when 3 men expected her to move. She did not want to be defined by it forever. She was 24 years old, and she had a life to build that was much larger than a single afternoon. And she did not intend to spend the next 40 years as the girl from the motorcycle shop, though she understood that other people would hold that image of her, whether she cultivated it or not. But she also understood something else. Dorothy Caswell had signed her husband's pen to get her shop back because someone had gone first. Benito Aguilar had been ready for 2 years and had been waiting for a door to open. 11 people across Phoenix had started phone calls with a federal investigator because something had happened at a corner shop on a Tuesday and proved to them that the wall they had believed was too high could, in fact, be climbed. She had not done that by being extraordinary. She had done it by being present and paying attention and refusing to accept the premise that silence was protection. If her name being in a public document meant that someone, somewhere, who was standing behind a counter in a locked room with no obvious backup, understood that they were not the first and were not alone, then her name could be in the document. I feel okay about it, she said. Marcus nodded. Ethan said, You ready to go back to work? She looked at him. You're asking me back. You never left, he said, with the specific simplicity of a man who did not consider the question to have been complicated. You're the best employee I've ever had. You outsmarted 3 men, activated a federal investigation, and reorganized my filing system so well that I can actually find things. You're not going anywhere. She almost laughed. Almost, and then did laugh, actually fully the real thing. Okay, she said. Yeah, let's go back to work. They drove back through Phoenix in the November afternoon, the city going about its ordinary business around them, ordinary and indifferent, and full of people carrying their own histories, their own fears, their own decisions about what they would do when the moment came that asked something real of them. Some of them would find out they were braver than they knew. Some of them would not be tested. Some of them had already been through it and were on the other side, rebuilding. Madison Harper looked out the window of Ethan Cole's truck and thought about her mother and thought about a woman named Dorothy who had kept copies and thought about 41 minutes of audio on a phone that had been in the right pocket at the right moment because she had paid attention and had not looked away. She thought about 3 men who had walked into a shop and locked the door behind them and believed they were the most powerful people in the room. She thought about how wrong they had been. And she thought about the sound, that first distant rumble that had built and built until it filled an entire Phoenix street on a Tuesday afternoon in August. The sound of people who had decided that one of their own was worth showing up for. The specific and undeniable sound of community refusing to allow one person to carry something alone that did not have to be carried alone. Travis Dalton had believed that nobody was coming for Madison Harper. He had believed it because he had built his entire operation on the premise that certain people, young people, quiet people, Working people, people who had lost things and were still finding their footing, did not have the kind of networks that showed up, did not have the kind of histories that generated loyalty, did not have the kind of courage that held steady in a locked room when courage was the only available weapon. He had been wrong on every count, because Madison Harper had stood behind her counter and refused to move, because Ethan Cole had written a name in a notebook and said, "Still here," because Marcus Bennett had answered a call from a number he didn't recognize and asked for an address without hesitating, because Dorothy Caswell had listened to her dead husband's voice and kept copies of everything, because 195 riders had started their engines on a Tuesday afternoon and pointed them toward a corner shop on a quiet Phoenix street. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the person who stands there anyway and holds the door open long enough for everyone else to walk through.